Recently, there's been a lot of talk about the difficulty level in Destiny. Top-end players have been both vocal to the community and the devs at Bungie about the game being too easy. They cite both the open world activities as well as the in-game content. The last thing I want to do is rehash the arguments of the raid Deepstone Crypt difficulty level as being pedestrian. Opinions on what difficulty really is varies and is purely subjective. I believe the heart of the matter lies with the term accessibility and a balance between lethality of enemies and mechanics. Let's face it, if the mechanics of a raid are on par with subjective expectations, but the lethality of combatants are ramped up, you may not live long enough to even figure out what the mechanics are. The balancing act the devs perform can teeter in either direction, which leads to player frustration. Let's take a step back. In my opinion, Destiny was never meant to be a game that crushes your soul. There's plenty of games that do that, games like Dark Souls. But by no means are those types of games too hard for everyone. But the rage-inducing, keyboard controller smashing, shout at the devil moments are so many players either give up or just never purchase the title on reputation alone. Destiny, on the other hand, has fostered a solo-friendly experience that meshes incredibly well with the social aspect, bringing players together and forming friendships. The meme friendship game, or friend game, really isn't that far off the mark. Now let's move back to the raid. I've read many comments from top-end players that what they really want is a hard mode for the raid. One in particular said the enemies were so weak in the recent raid that they tried to wipe and it took forever. I've seen and heard not only in Destiny but other games as well, when enemies become more lethal, maybe beefier, the feedback becomes that the combatants are bullet sponges, or that the players have to hang way back in the map and peek shots to progress. Both of these options equally are not great. Another solution is harder mechanics, but let's be honest, after a few days the top-end players will have strategies that nullify pretty much anything a dev can throw at them. And let us also not forget the cheese factor. Inevitably, there will be a strat to bypass all challenges, and most players opt for speed over that challenge. I'm looking at you, Riven. So for argument's sake, let's say that the dev does come with some hard mode balance that the mechanics and the enemies both become a more challenging experience. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with top-end players asking for this harder content. It's just that the expectation that Bungie would want to put the dev time and money into said harder content, the return on investment may not be there. Can you imagine a raid that takes 8 hours to complete every time? A strike that takes 45 minutes? A dungeon that takes 4 hours? I would argue the player base would shrink to a point of non-profitability. Let's take a closer look at the economics of difficulty and balance. Most of the best-selling titles of all time have been accessible by large numbers of gamers. Fortnite, Breath of the Wild, Red Dead Redemption, Minecraft, GTA 5 all welcome players to all aspects of their game. Some have challenging activities and some require more skill than others, but the crux of the most profitable games keep accessibility a high priority. Even the much argued skill-based matchmaking keeps Call of Duty on the list of the top-selling games of the decade with nearly every release. Basic economics say that if a game can't sell to the masses, it won't get made. So a studio makes a decision to balance the game for a very large audience. I hardly see sacrificing profits for the top 10% or 1% of players as being a good business move. It's like Ford deciding to only make the GT. Yeah, it's an amazing machine, but how many would they sell? The same could be said for Sony. Sure, they could build a better console, but an MSRP of $800 to $1,000 would very much limit the units sold. Maybe a better comparison would be if Michael Jordan met with the commissioner of the NBA in the early 90s and said, "Hey, listen, this game's too easy. I talked to Shaq, Karl Malone, Hakeem Olajuwon, and David Robinson. They all agree. I think you should raise the basket to 14 feet, make the three-point line the half-court line. What do you think?" Can you imagine what all the other NBA players would say? Now, whether or not that comparison is fully equitable, I hope you see the point. This leads to the fun factor of Destiny. If parts of this game can only be completed by the upper echelon of players, or activities take 3 times longer to complete, the overall player base suffers. I would also go as far to say that the game's difficulty related to accessibility is beneficial to those top-end content creators. The things these players can do fascinate the Twitch viewership, in turn leading to careers being made. If the player base was low, but these talented gamers were dominating foes, would people even watch a game they don't also play themselves? Maybe, but unlikely. I started playing Destiny December of its release year. I've played with great players, I've played with less talented players, but I've always had fun. I would assume my experience would be far different if multiple parts of Destiny felt out of reach for me and most of the friends that I've made. So what does this all mean? The old term, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, comes to mind, but something that a lot of people have said and content creators have said is you vote with your wallet. So as long as Destiny is selling as well as it is and the player base remains healthy, then why would they change anything? As I've stated previously, content creators have made careers on this game. They've made thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on Destiny content. So, if things were to change, would that affect their wallets as well? There have been a lot of top-end content creators who've come and gone from Destiny. They've played other games and had success with variety gaming. I would go as far to say that Destiny was never intended to be the only game that you play every week. Destiny has been resilient beyond my expectations. It's been declared dead more times than I can count. The thing that brings players back is it just works, sometimes better and sometimes worse at times, and it has defied its genre, arguably creating a new one. When we also look at the content roadmap, we see that we have plenty of Destiny coming in the future, and I can only assume that the player base will remain strong as long as, number one, the story still remains interesting, which the renewed focus on it has been fantastic. The weapons are interesting, which they've made many changes even recently to make sure that that happens. We could go on for hours about small changes that could make the game better, and I would argue that Bungie's listened to a lot of the community feedback and made some of those changes high priorities and some they've promised for the future. My commentary here today was never meant to throw shade at the top-end players wanting harder content. That can be argued all day long, especially considering the topic of difficulty is so subjective. What I wanted to accomplish was trying to shed some light on why the game is as difficult as it is in its current state. We need a high player base. We need people logging on every day with a chance to improve their stats, to get better weapons. If Bungie decided to put really high-end content in the game and to make it desirable for those players to play, i.e. the rewards, alienating a portion of the player base could cause them to not log on as much, could cause them not to watch Twitch, which would then affect content creators' wallets. If the player base were to dwindle, or even if there was a mass exodus of players deciding not to log on daily, that affects the profitability for Bungie, which in turn could lead them to closing the game out, making this game cost money. We need a high player base. We need people to buy those battle passes. We need them to buy the DLC, and if they choose not to, well, all those careers made by Destiny and by Bungie could go by the wayside. There's no doubt going to be people that disagree with my commentary here today. They may fully disagree, they may partially disagree. There could be some out there that 100% agree with it. But those top-end players, those players like Glad and Giggs and SlayerAge, those guys are so talented and so good at this game, I'm not sure Bungie could throw anything at them that would stop them in their tracks. I think I could talk for hours about how the developers at Bungie try to make sure that their game is accessible to as many players as possible. I could talk for hours about how the top-end players feel dissatisfied with the challenge that's been presented to them. But at the risk of this being an hour-long video, I'm going to wrap it up right there. I want to thank everyone who got to the end of this video, and whether you agree or disagree with me, drop it down in the comment section. I'd love to have a conversation with you about your point of view on where Destiny is headed in the future. A like and a sub would be very much appreciated. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching.